You are watching the press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. In the next half hour, we'll see what's making the headlines with the editor of The Voice newspaper, Esther Holloway, and the writer and broadcaster, Esther Krakue. Welcome to both of you. So let's see what's on some of those front pages, first of all. Well, the Metro lead with Rishi Sunak at his first Conservative Party conference as leader, reassuring jittery backbenchers that he does want to cut taxes ahead of next year's anticipated general election. My target is winflation, their headline. The conference in Manchester also in focus on the front of The Guardian. They claim Rishi Sunak is struggling to hold together a fractured party as rival groups battle over election battlegrounds. The Eye also reports on the Prime Minister's battle to form a united front as they claim future leadership hopefuls are jostling for position with a general election approaching. The Daily Express says the Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, wants to turn the screw on those living on benefits instead of working by limiting their access to welfare. The Financial Times, meanwhile, features a warning that the Prime Minister's weakening of climate policies will see UK exporters facing hundreds of millions of pounds worth of EU tax hikes in 2026. The Mirror says a host of celebrities, including Brian Cox, Olivia Colman and others, have backed the paper's campaign for all primary school children to receive free school meals. The Sun claims Russian hackers were behind a cyber attack on the official royal family website, just days after King Charles condemned the war in Ukraine. The Daily Mail leads with a claim the Education Secretary, Gillian Keegan, is poised to ban smartphones in classrooms in a bid to limit disruption. And the Daily Star carries a warning that the unseasonably warm weather may have unwanted results for those playing conkers. As you do daily. A reminder that by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's papers while you watched us. And we are joined tonight by Esther Holloway and Esther Krakue. I thought it was against health and safety to play conkers nowadays, actually.
I actually can't believe that's made headlines.
You're probably too young. Probably too young. But let's move on quickly. We'll start with the front page of The Guardian. And they're talking about, well, there's been much reported that the many factions in the Conservative Party on the first day of Tory Party conference in Manchester, not the united front that they would want to present, perhaps.
Yes, definitely not. Well, the problem is they have nothing to get united behind. So obviously in 2019, Boris's big slogan was "Get Brexit Done." That's no longer in play anymore. So what is Rishi Sunak's plan to unite the party? And obviously he doesn't seem like a very strong leader at the moment. He doesn't put forth a bright vision for Britain. So you have all these people in the party, Kemi Badenoch being an example, vying for more attention, right? If she makes the headlines, she becomes a greater hopeful for Conservative leadership. And that's the problem that Rishi Sunak is facing. He's basically facing a battle against the clock. He needs to provide an alternative vision for Britain that the Tories haven't been able to do just yet. And obviously we're still waiting on the Labour Party's vision for Britain, but the longer that the incumbent Prime Minister delays on that, the more ammunition he's giving his political rivals.
Lester, do you think that's fair? He set out his 5 pledges, many people saying that actually now he seems to be a reinvigorated Prime Minister, that Rishi Sunak is talking quite tough.
Well, he certainly seemed to be quite perky on another channel this morning. But at the same time, the wheels do seem to be falling off the wagon. The Conservative Party conference has only just begun. And you've already got various different ministers and former ministers freewheeling on different policies, for example, pushing for tax cuts, as we heard from Michael Gove this morning. And, of course, other ministers are doing so as well. So it does create the impression that it's a party which is pulling in every which direction, which is sending out all the wrong signals. Now, clearly, Rishi Sunak is trying to pick 1 or 2 issues which are the sort of clear blue water with Labour when it comes to, for example, climate change policies and the so-called war on motorists. But even then, they appear to be individual sort of policies rather than a wider vision for how the Conservatives are going to be moving forward to the next election and beyond if they were ever to actually win it. I can't see the coherence there between those two policies and the other 5 things that Rishi Sunak says he wants to do, but nobody can even remember what they are.
Yeah, which is basically a shopping list. More than anything.
I won't challenge you to this then. Or should I? No, I won't. Let's move on to the eye, and it was briefly mentioned in The Guardian, and this is this leaders in waiting narrative. Who are those leaders in waiting, Esther?
Well, Suella Braverman, Priti Patel, Kemi Badenoch, they're all championing different issues. Kemi Badenoch has kind of been the voice of the anti-woke in the Conservative Party, which still annoys me because I don't think most people can even define the word woke.
I planned it on this.
That's very good. Suella Braverman.
We don't ever
talk about it.
Use it, yes.
Suella Braverman has obviously made headlines this week on her comments about multiculturalism failing in the UK. Again, not a particularly no actual policy approach there. She's just making comments that don't seem to be going very far. Priti Patel obviously has been leading the charge, particularly in where sort of tax cuts are concerned, which, is always a sign that I'm a true Conservative if I'm calling for tax cuts. But then, again, we come back to policy and substance. Where would you cut taxes the most? I mean, Jeremy Hunt has been talking about, getting the work shy back into work by reducing the benefits. But actually, the conversation should be incentivizing more people to work by cutting or increasing their tax-free allowance or cutting NI or actual substantial policy initiatives. So, they're just people trying to grab headlines, but there's no real substance behind it. And I think that's actually the bigger issue of the Conservative Party. They're so devoid of any ideas that anyone can grab headlines by saying such shallow things at the conference.
But also seemingly having a dig at each other. Priti Patel saying it's disappointing to see leadership candidates competing, but refuses to rule out making a bit of her own. And she criticises Sunak, saying it's not a good public look for him to distance himself from the 2019 manifesto and hits out at populist pledges on migration. So there's definitely a clash between Patel and Braverman.
Yes, there was certainly a bit of shade that was thrown this morning. But it's, Priti Patel is not beyond a bit of populism herself, as those with memory slightly longer than the goldfish can remember. As Home Secretary, she was very populist.
Does she seem quite moderate now in comparison to Braverman, do you think?
Well, to a certain extent, because, she's not pushing those controversial and to some people's mind, abhorrent policies in relation to, wave machines in the Channel and other things to put off migrants coming in. But the Conservatives are going to have a big problem with that, because even though the number of boat crossings are increasing, it's still less than a fifth of all migration to Britain. And with suggestions, rumours that the next figure for immigration is going to be over 100,000. That is going to rightly lead to a lot of people to actually ask themselves the question. We've had all this rhetoric about dealing with, what some people say is excess migration, but actually it's not having any effect at all. And so that will actually open the door, I think, for the Labour Party next week in their conference to say, look, we are the party that actually wants to get to grips with the nuts and bolts of the system. So I think that's how they will pitch themselves.
I actually think you just made a point that Priti Patel made with Suella Braverman. She actually said it's not enough to just talk, you have to act. Now, that's a bit ironic because she's considering she was Home Secretary. But she's basically pitting her record against Suella Braverman's record and saying, actually, I didn't make as outlandish statements as you did, but I probably got a lot further than you have, which is a pretty fair evaluation of the current situation.
Let's move on to the Financial Times and this story regarding Greg Hands, the party chair, who's basically admitting or saying he believes that the Tories are the underdogs. Have I read that correctly? Is that what
yes,
saying?
yes, surprisingly, which is not a great place to be when you've been in power for 13 years and are still in power. But, this is the point I've made repeatedly. I don't think that the chasm is as great between the Tories and the Labour Party, even though, polls put Keir Starmer's party 15 to 30 points ahead of Rishi Sunak. I think the issue is what are you offering the country? And I think that's an issue that resonates sort of with both parties. The bigger problem that the Conservatives have is they have been in power for the last 13 years. So if you do want to finish the job, you have to offer, a vision for what that actually looks like. People are not just going to vote because, you say good things. But at the same time, the Labour Party can't just pit their hopes of winning on just we're not the Tories, because people could think, actually, you're worse than the Tories and just stick with the enemy or the devil that they do know. And it's a similar problem that the Lib Dems have, which is why they're shoring up all the great talents of their party to come up with a reasonable manifesto for the next election. But yes, the Tories are the underdogs, because I actually don't see that much of a difference between the two at the moment.
I do wonder the extent to which Conservatives are really think they will win at all. That a lot of this headline grabbing that we actually see from the Suella Bravermans, the Kemi Badnooks of this world, it feels like it's actually about the outcome or the aftermath of the next election when they lose, and then it's a battle for the heart and soul of the Tory party. Absolutely. So I think that yes, they are underdogs if you look at the polls, but actually I think the strategy, it appears to me, is very much one about lessening the damage and saving as many of those seats as possible, so that they're not an undignified rump when it comes to sorting themselves out in opposition.
Yeah, but it's always more difficult for the incumbent, isn't it, to win the election. Many saying that it's Labour's to lose, really. That's up to them not to put a foot wrong. But as you say, we need more detail on their policies. We've just got about a minute to talk about why Northern voters are angry at Rishi Sunak. This is the Mirror's take on this. Esther?
Because he chose Manchester to announce that he would probably scale back HS2, the Birmingham to Manchester leg of HS2. Obviously the bigger issue here is, because I actually do think HS2 is still quite divisive. It's always been a divisive initiative. What is the alternative, right? There are many people that are making the argument, okay, if you're saying that HS2, the cost has inflated over a decade that it's been announced, do you have a levelling up alternative for the north of the country? Are you going to try and strengthen inter-regional links and infrastructure as opposed to scrapping this giant project, which is basically a vanity project between Manchester and London at this point? The Leeds extension was scrapped. And that's the issue, right? Because you're not seeing any vision, any actual alternative for the party. And so, the Northerners are really angry that Rishi Sunak chose their city to tell them that they're actually not going to get any sort of levelling up infrastructure, at least in the form of HS2. And I think that's quite unfortunate planning and foresight on the part of Tories.
But it probably was deliberate, though.
I really don't think so. If it was, I think they should fire all their staff and hire me instead.
On that note, and your job application, we're going to take a break. Coming up, we'll look at how the issue of aid to Ukraine is becoming a big talking point in the US ahead of next year's election. Do stay with us. Welcome back. You are watching the press preview. Still with me, Lester Holloway and Esther Krakue. Let's have a look at the Express front page and this story about Jeremy Hunt, the Chancellor. The quote there is he will turn the screw on those who would rather live on benefits instead of working, suggesting that it's a choice.
Well, here's the issue. He's been faced with, I think it's 2.2 million people that are out of work that don't have to look for work because they are permanently disabled. But under the disability that most of the people under that rubric have claimed, it's because of more mental health issues, mainly depression and anxiety. And that number swelled during the pandemic. So now he's under pressure to actually effectively skim off the number of people that are on welfare. The issue he has now is either cut benefits or incentivize people to work. Now, you always want to choose the latter option because it's actually more sustainable. But he is choosing the former option because, for some reason, political instinct is lacking in this party. For the people that have been calling for tax cuts in the party, I've always said the easiest way to do that would be to either increase the tax-free allowance or reduce NI, but that's not the approach that the Chancellor wants to take. So we'll see how successful this is, but I highly doubt it. It's probably going to go down like a house on fire and just solidify this view that the Tories basically hate the working class and anyone who's struggling, especially during a cost of living crisis.
Well, the quote here from the Chancellor: "I'm incredibly proud to live in a country where, as Churchill said, there's a ladder everyone can climb, but also a safety net below which no one falls. But paying for that safety net is a social contract that depends on fairness to those in work alongside compassion to those who are not."
Well, that's a bit of rhetoric that doesn't really match up with reality. We've actually had government commissioned reports on social mobility, which shows that Britain is really lacking when it comes to social mobility, the ability to actually escape your background and move up the ladder. So that's not necessarily true. But you can tell when the Conservatives are in a bit of a hole, because they tend to return to their greatest hits of the past. And, you know, about 10 years ago, we had a lot of rhetoric and a lot of shows on Channel 5, etc., which were demonising people on benefits. And it feels like this is just being thrown in because it's one of their old favourites. But at the end of the day, half of people on universal credit are actually working. There are many two-parent households where they are relying on benefits because it's taking up the shortfall with poverty wages, and their children are still going hungry. So you know, this idea that benefits equals the work shy is just you know, simply not true. When it comes to people who have long-term sicknesses, for example, there are things that government can do to help them back into work. So I'm not saying that there was no issue to tackle, but I certainly think that this whole thing about, you know, the strivers and the skivers and the work shy and so on, it benefits nobody, and we already have a huge system of sanctions, a very strong sort of, you know, penalty-based welfare system. So, you know, how tight does Jeremy Hunt really want to turn that screw?
We shall see. I think let's move to The Sun and this story. We've just got time to do this one about Russian hackers attacking the royal family's website, the royal website. Esther?
Yes, so the website went down for 90 minutes yesterday, and the Russian cyber criminals have basically owned up to it. It makes me question their priorities. Surely you'd want to take down a more important website than the royal family's website. But this is something that apparently they were very passionate about. And yeah, for 90 minutes, we couldn't access the royal family's website. So I'm sure the country was beside itself in agony.
I think the timing in this is significant because this comes days after King Charles' condemnation of the war in Ukraine.
Well, I'm not sure who noticed that the website was down, to be honest. There couldn't have been too many people that did. But it feels like a bit of a soft target, to be perfectly honest. You know, if they'd have cracked the Ministry of Defence's website, that might have been something to crow about. But I think the royal family's website, you know, it's clearly the type of thing which is aimed at creating a few headlines on the basis of this hacker group, which is apparently pro-Kremlin, but it doesn't really amount to a hill of beans at the end of the day.
I don't actually think they did it. I think it just happened to go down and they were like, yeah, we did it.
Really?
No, yeah, I think so.
So it's a double bluff.
Absolutely.
But could there be any serious damage done, though? I mean, maybe we're missing something?
No, obviously. I mean, I would be more concerned if they access intimate personal files of the NHS, basically a database or something like that, but not the royal family's website. There's hardly anything you can do damage with there. We can all see it, so.
But it makes a front page.
And it does. It definitely does.
OK, Lester and Esther, thank you very much for the moment.